Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked the navigation console of his cargo ship. The old vessel hummed steadily through the darkness of space, carrying medical supplies to a remote mining colony. It was a simple job, the kind Jake had done 100 times before. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, just honest work that paid enough to keep him flying. He was about to pour himself another cup of coffee when the emergency scanner beeped. Jake frowned and leaned forward. A distress beacon was pulsing weakly from somewhere nearby. He adjusted the scanner and traced the signal to a small escape pod drifting about 2,000 kilometers away. Jake hesitated for only a moment. Out here in the border regions between human and alien territories, distress calls could mean trouble. Pirates sometimes used fake beacons to lure ships into ambushes, but Jake had never been the type to ignore someone who might need help. He changed course and guided his ship toward the signal. As he approached, his scanner revealed the pod's condition. It was badly damaged, with scorch marks along its hull and a failing life support system. Someone was definitely inside, and they were in serious danger. Jake maneuvered his cargo ship alongside the pod and activated the docking clamps. The magnetic locks grabbed hold with a metallic clang that echoed through his ship. Jake pulled on his emergency pressure suit and made his way to the airlock. He carefully opened the outer hatch and peered into the escape pod through the small window. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Inside was a child, but not a human child. Her skin had a faint blue shimmer, and her hair was silver and seemed to glow softly. She was unconscious and bleeding from a wound on her shoulder. Without wasting another second, Jake forced open the damaged pod door. The girl was small, perhaps the size of a human 10-year-old. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Jake gently lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she was, and carried her back into his ship. He laid her on the medical bunk in his small infirmary and immediately began checking her vital signs. The wound on her shoulder looked like a burn from an energy weapon. Jake cleaned it carefully and applied a medical gel that worked on most species. He had learned basic emergency medicine during his years of solo space travel, and he was grateful for that training now. The girl's strange blue blood worried him. But the wound began to seal as the gel did its work. Jake set up an IV line with a universal fluid that would help stabilize her. As he worked, he noticed the quality of her clothing. The fabric was unlike anything he had seen before, shimmering with threads that seemed to change color in the light. Around her neck was a pendant with a symbol he didn't recognize, but it was clearly valuable and carefully crafted. The girl's eyes suddenly fluttered open. They were a deep, violet color, beautiful and frightened. She looked at Jake and immediately tried to pull away, panic flooding her features. Hey, it's okay," Jake said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you." The girl didn't seem to understand his words, but something in his tone must have calmed her slightly. She touched the bandage on her shoulder and looked at him with confusion. Jake pointed to himself. "Jake," he said clearly. Then he pointed to her with a questioning look. The girl watched him carefully for a long moment. Then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, she said, "Liara." Jake smiled gently. "Liara, that's a beautiful name. You're going to be okay, Liara. I promise." Over the next few hours, Jake stayed by her side as she drifted in and out of consciousness. He managed to access the pod's damaged computer system and recovered some data. What he found made his stomach drop. The pod was registered to the Zelvari Empire, one of the most powerful alien civilizations in this sector of space, and according to the identification codes, this girl was Princess Liara, daughter of Queen Sareth herself. Jake sat back heavily in his chair. He had rescued an alien princess. The implications were enormous. The Zelvari were known to be protective of their royal family. If anything happened to Liara, there could be serious consequences. But there was also evidence in the pod's logs of a pirate attack. 3 royal guards had fought to protect Liara and managed to get her into the escape pod before they were killed. The pirates had damaged the pod badly before it managed to jump away. Liara stirred on the medical bunk and opened her eyes again. This time she seemed more aware. She looked at Jake with those violet eyes and said something in her own language. Jake shook his head to show he didn't understand. Liara frowned slightly, then touched her chest and said her name again. She pointed at Jake. "Jake Morrison," he said, giving her his full name. She tried to repeat it, struggling with the unfamiliar sounds. "Jake Morrison." He nodded and smiled. "Close enough." Liara managed a small smile in return. She pointed to the bandage on her shoulder and then to Jake, and placed her hand over her heart in what he recognized as a gesture of gratitude. Jake knew what he had to do. He couldn't just send a message and hope someone would pick up the princess. She was too important, and there might still be pirates hunting for her. He needed to take her home himself, directly to Zelvari space. It would take him several days out of his way and he would lose the payment for his cargo delivery, but he couldn't abandon her now. He pulled up the star charts and plotted a course for the Zelvari homeworld. Liara watched him work with curious eyes. Jake showed her the route on the screen and pointed to a glowing planet at the end of it. He pointed to her and then to the planet. Understanding dawned in her eyes, and they filled with tears. She nodded eagerly and said something that sounded like thanks in her musical language. Jake set the course and engaged the engines. As his ship turned toward Zelvari space, he looked at the young princess resting on his medical bunk. She was already falling asleep again, but this time she looked peaceful rather than frightened. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would change his life forever. 3 days later, Jake's cargo ship crossed into Zelvari territory. Almost immediately, his console lit up with warning signals. 4 massive warships appeared on his scanner, surrounding him from all sides. They were sleek and powerful, painted in deep purple with silver markings that gleamed against the darkness of space. A voice crackled over his communication system, speaking in the Zelvari language. Jake didn't understand the words, but the commanding tone was clear. He raised his hands, even though they couldn't see him, and slowly reached for the communication panel. "This is Jake Morrison of Earth," he said carefully. "I have Princess Liara aboard my ship. She's safe and unharmed. I'm bringing her home." There was a long silence. Then the voice returned, this time speaking in heavily accented but understandable English. "You will follow our lead ship. Do not deviate from the course. Any hostile action will result in your immediate destruction." Jake swallowed hard. "Understood. I'm following you." Liara had come to stand beside him during the exchange. She looked at the warships on the screen and then touched Jake's arm gently. She pointed to herself and then to the communication panel. Jake nodded and handed her the headset. Liara spoke rapidly in her own language. Jake watched as the tension seemed to drain from the voice on the other end. The Zelvari officer spoke with clear relief and what sounded like joy. Liara kept pointing at Jake as she talked, and he had the feeling she was explaining how he had saved her. The warships escorted Jake's small cargo ship toward a beautiful blue and green planet. As they descended through the atmosphere, Jake saw cities that looked like they were made of crystal and light. Towers spiraled into the sky, connected by bridges that seemed too delicate to be real. Gardens and waterways wound between the buildings, creating a harmony between nature and architecture that took his breath away. They landed at what was clearly a royal spaceport. Soldiers in ceremonial armor lined the landing platform, and beyond them Jake could see crowds of people held back by barriers. News of the princess's return had obviously spread quickly. Jake helped Liara down the ship's ramp. She was still weak from her injury, and she held onto his hand tightly. The soldiers immediately formed a protective circle around them. One of the officers, a tall Zelvari with deep blue skin and silver markings on his face, stepped forward. "I am Commander Vexen, head of the Royal Guard," he said in English. "Princess Liara will be taken to the Palace Medical Center. You will come with us." It wasn't a request. Jake nodded and stayed close to Liara as they were led to a transport vehicle. Liara refused to let go of his hand, and the commander didn't try to separate them. They flew through the Crystal City toward a magnificent palace that seemed to grow out of a mountainside. Its walls sparkled in the sunlight like diamonds. Inside the palace, Jake was overwhelmed by the beauty around him. High ceilings, flowing water features, and plants that glowed with soft light created an atmosphere of peace and power. But he had little time to take it all in. They were rushed through corridors until they reached a grand hall with doors that reached at least 20 feet high. The doors opened, and Jake found himself walking into a throne room. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat a woman who could only be Queen Sareth. She was tall and regal, with skin that shimmered like starlight. Her silver hair flowed down her back, and she wore robes of deep purple that seemed to move like water. Her eyes, the same violet as Liara's, were fixed on the doorway with an intensity that made Jake's heart race. When Liara saw her mother, she let go of Jake's hand and ran forward despite her injury. The queen rose from her throne and rushed down the steps, all royal dignity forgotten. She caught her daughter in her arms and held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. The entire court watched in silence as the queen whispered to her child in their language, touching her face and hair as if to make sure she was real. After a long moment, Queen Sareth composed herself slightly and looked up at Jake. She said something to Liara, who nodded eagerly and began speaking rapidly, pointing at Jake and touching her bandaged shoulder. The young princess was clearly telling the story of her rescue. The queen listened intently, her expression changing from relief to surprise to something deeper that Jake couldn't quite name. When Liara finished, Queen Sareth stood and walked toward Jake. He immediately dropped to one knee, not sure what else to do when facing alien royalty. "Rise," the queen said in perfect English. Her voice was musical and strong. "You are Jake Morrison of Earth?" Jake stood, feeling awkward and out of place in his worn flight suit among all this splendor. "Yes, Your Majesty. My daughter tells me you found her escape pod, that you healed her wounds and brought her home, even though it took you far from your own path." The queen's eyes searched his face. "Is this true?" "I couldn't leave her out there," Jake said simply. "She needed help." A murmur ran through the assembled court. Several advisors stepped forward, whispering urgently to the queen. One of them, an elderly Zelvari with elaborate robes, spoke loud enough for Jake to hear. "Your Majesty, we must consider his motives. Perhaps he seeks reward or political advantage. It is suspicious that a human would risk so much for a stranger." Jake felt his face flush with anger, but he kept his voice calm. "I don't want anything. I just wanted to make sure Liara got home safely." The queen held up her hand, silencing her advisors. She studied Jake for a long moment. "You ask for nothing? No payment for your lost cargo delivery? No reward for saving the life of my only child?" Jake shook his head. "Just some fuel and supplies to get home? If that's okay, seeing her safe with you is enough." The silence in the throne room was absolute. Queen Sareth's eyes widened slightly, and something in her expression softened. She glanced at her daughter, who was watching Jake with complete trust and affection, and then back at Jake. "Commander Vexen," she said quietly, "how many of our guards died protecting my daughter?" "3, Your Majesty," Vexen replied, his voice heavy with grief. "They fought bravely." 3 trained warriors gave their lives for Liara," the queen said, her voice carrying through the hall. And this human, alone and unarmed, completed their mission. He asked for nothing, expected nothing, and wanted only to see a child return to her mother. She stepped closer to Jake, and he saw tears glistening in her eyes again. My mate, Liara's father, died 5 years ago. He was a man of great honor and kindness. When I look at you, Jake Morrison, I see those same qualities. You have shown me that such goodness exists beyond our own people. The Queen turned to address her entire court. I will offer you anything within my power as reward. Wealth, land, a position of honor in our empire. Name what you desire. Jake felt uncomfortable with all eyes on him. He thought about what he really wanted, and the answer was simple. I appreciate that, Your Majesty, really. But I don't need any of those things. Just knowing I helped someone is enough. Queen Sareth smiled then, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed her face. She placed her hand over her heart in the same gesture Liara had used. Then I will give you something you have not asked for, but which you have earned. A gift that honors both you and my daughter. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. I, Queen Sareth of the Zelvari Empire, declare before this court that Jake Morrison of Earth shall be my adopted son. He will carry the title of prince and will be honored as family for all his days. Jake's mind went blank. He stared at the Queen in complete shock, unable to process what he had just heard. Liara clapped her hands together with delight and ran to hug him. The court erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. Jake looked down at the young princess holding on to him, then up at the Queen who was watching him with maternal warmth, and realized his simple cargo run had just become something far more complicated than he ever could have imagined. Jake woke up in a room that was larger than his entire cargo ship. The ceiling was high and painted with images of stars and nebulas that seemed to move in the soft morning light. The bed was incredibly comfortable, covered in fabrics that felt like silk but shimmered with colors he had never seen before. For a moment, he thought it had all been a dream. Then he saw the royal emblem on the wall and remembered. He was Prince Jake Morrison now, adopted son of an alien queen. The thought made him want to laugh and panic at the same time. A soft chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. Before he could answer, Liara burst into the room, followed by a flustered servant who was trying to remind her about proper protocol. The young princess ignored the servant completely and jumped onto Jake's bed with a huge smile. "Good morning, brother," she said in careful English. She had been practicing the words with her tutors. Jake couldn't help but smile back. "Good morning, Liara. You're supposed to knock first, you know." She giggled and said something in Zelvari that he was pretty sure meant she didn't care about rules. The servant sighed and left them alone, closing the door quietly. Liara pulled Jake out of bed and showed him the clothes that had been prepared for him. They were beautiful garments in shades of blue and silver, clearly expensive and royal. Jake looked at them with uncertainty. He was used to flight suits and comfortable work clothes, not this fancy stuff. "I don't know if I can wear these," he said. Liara tilted her head, not understanding. Jake pointed to the clothes and then to himself, shaking his head. She frowned and grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the mirror. She stood beside him and pointed at their reflection, then at the matching colors in their clothes. She was trying to tell him they were family now, and family dressed in coordinating colors. Jake sighed and gave in. The clothes were surprisingly comfortable once he put them on, even if he felt like he was playing dress-up. Liara clapped her hands happily and led him out of his quarters. The palace was even more magnificent in daylight. Servants and court members bowed as they passed, which made Jake deeply uncomfortable. He tried to smile and nod back, unsure of the proper etiquette. Liara seemed to enjoy showing him around, pointing out her favorite spots and chattering away in a mix of Zelvari and broken English. They arrived at a dining hall where Queen Sareth was already seated. She looked up as they entered and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Jake. I hope you slept well." Yes, thank you, Your Majesty, Jake said, still not sure how informal he was allowed to be. Please, when we are in family settings, you may call me Sareth, the Queen said gently. We are family now. Jake sat down at the table, and servants immediately began bringing food. There were fruits he didn't recognize, bread that sparkled slightly, and drinks in various colors. Liara helped him identify what was safe for humans to eat, pointing at dishes and nodding or shaking her head. This must all be very strange for you, Sareth said as they ate. I understand if you have questions or concerns. Jake set down his fork. I appreciate everything, really, but I'm not sure I understand what being your adopted son actually means. I mean, in practical terms. Sareth nodded thoughtfully. In our culture, adoption is a sacred bond. It is not done lightly. When I named you as my son, I gave you all the rights and responsibilities of a royal family member. You have a voice in court, a place in our succession line after Liara, and the protection of our entire empire. Jake nearly choked on his drink. Succession line? You mean I could potentially rule? Only if something happened to both Liara and myself, which is extremely unlikely, Sareth said calmly. But yes, technically. More importantly, you are now connected to our family forever. What happens to us matters to you, and what happens to you matters to us. Liara reached over and squeezed Jake's hand, smiling at him. She said something in Zelvari. She says she's happy to have a big brother to protect her, Sareth translated. She has felt very alone since her father died. Jake looked at the young princess and felt his heart soften. Despite all the strangeness and the overwhelming nature of his new situation, he couldn't regret helping her. I'm glad I found you, Liara, he said honestly. Over the next few weeks, Jake slowly adjusted to his new life. He attended formal dinners and learned basic Zelvari customs. He discovered that the royal family ate together every evening, a tradition that Sareth held sacred. During these meals, Jake began to understand the queen better. She was strong and wise, but also lonely. The weight of ruling an entire empire rested on her shoulders, and she had carried it alone since her mate's death. Sometimes Jake would catch her looking at him with an expression that mixed sadness and warmth. And he realized she missed having family around her. Liara became his constant companion. She taught him words in Zelvari, and he taught her more English. They explored the palace gardens together, where plants from dozens of worlds grew in carefully maintained sections. Liara loved to tell him stories about each planet and the adventures her father had told her about. One afternoon, they were sitting by a fountain when Liara suddenly became quiet. She touched the pendant around her neck, the one Jake had noticed when he first found her. My father gave me this, she said softly in English. Before he died, he told me it would keep me safe. Jake put his arm around her shoulders. He was right. It did keep you safe. Because it helped me know you were someone special who needed to get home. Liara leaned against him and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm glad the universe sent you to find me. I think my father would have liked you. Those simple words meant more to Jake than any royal title. He hugged his new little sister and felt the last of his resistance to this strange new family melt away. But not everyone in the palace was happy about Jake's presence. He noticed that some of the court advisors watched him with suspicious eyes. They whispered when he passed and fell silent when he got too close. Commander Vexen was polite but distant, clearly unsure what to make of a human in the royal family. One evening after dinner, Sareth asked Jake to walk with her in the private gardens. They strolled along paths lined with glowing flowers while guards kept a respectful distance. You've noticed that some of my advisors don't trust you, Sareth said. It wasn't a question. Jake nodded. I can't really blame them. I'm an outsider who suddenly became part of your family. It probably looks suspicious. They worry that you will influence my decisions or that you're here for personal gain, Sareth said. She stopped walking and turned to face him. But I have watched you these past weeks, Jake. I have seen how you are with Liara, how you treat the servants with respect, how you struggle with your new role because you don't feel you deserve it. These are not the actions of someone seeking power. I just want to do right by you and Liara, Jake said. You've both been so kind to me. Sareth smiled. And in the glow of the garden lights, she looked younger and less burdened. You remind me so much of my mate. He also had this quality of putting others before himself. He would have approved of my decision to make you family. She paused, then added quietly, It has been lonely, ruling alone and raising Liara without her father. Having you here has brought light back into our home. You may not realize it, but you have given us a gift as valuable as the one I gave you. Jake didn't know what to say to that. So he simply stood with the queen in the peaceful garden, two people from different worlds who had somehow become family, and let the moment speak for itself. Back in his quarters that night, Jake looked out at the Crystal City and thought about his old life. He missed the freedom of his cargo ship and the simplicity of his old routine. But when he thought about Liara's laugh and Sareth's grateful smile, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. He was beginning to understand that family wasn't about blood or species. It was about choosing to care for each other, even when it was complicated and strange. And somehow, against all odds, he had found that here among the stars with an alien queen and her daughter. 2 months had passed since Jake's adoption when the crisis began. He was in the palace library, studying Zelvari history with a patient tutor, when Commander Vexen arrived with an urgent expression on his face. Prince Jake, the Queen requests your presence in the council chamber immediately, Vexen said formally. Jake followed the commander through the palace corridors, wondering what could be wrong. When they entered the council chamber, he found Queen Sareth surrounded by her advisors, all looking worried. A large holographic display showed a star map with flashing red indicators along the border. Jake, thank you for coming, Sareth said, gesturing for him to join them at the table. We have a situation. The Corthan Federation is accusing us of violating their territorial boundaries. They claim our ships have been conducting unauthorized mining operations in their space. One of the advisors, an older Zelvari named Chancellor Drace, spoke up. The Corthans have provided sensor data showing our ships crossing into their territory repeatedly over the past month. They are threatening military action if we don't cease immediately and pay reparations. But we haven't sent any ships to that region, Sareth said firmly. Our mining operations are all documented and approved. None of them are anywhere near Corthan space. Jake studied the holographic map carefully. Something about it bothered him, but he couldn't quite figure out what. He had spent years navigating space routes for his cargo deliveries, and he had learned to read star charts better than most people. May I see the sensor data the Corthans provided? Jake asked. Chancellor Drace frowned. With respect, Prince Jake, this is a complex diplomatic matter. Perhaps it would be better if— Show him the data, Sareth interrupted quietly. Jake has experience in these regions. His perspective may be valuable. The Chancellor looked unhappy but complied. Jake examined the sensor readings closely, comparing them to the known positions of Zelvari mining ships. The more he looked, the more certain he became that something was wrong. These coordinates don't match, Jake said, pointing to specific readings. The Corthans are saying your ships were detected here, in their space. But according to these timestamps, your actual mining ships were logged on the opposite side of Zelvari territory at the same time. Unless you have ships that can cross half the Empire in minutes, someone is lying. The room fell silent. Everyone stared at Jake, then at the data. What are you suggesting? Vexen asked. Jake pulled up another section of the star map. showing the region between Zelvari and Korthan space. There's a third party in this area, the Drexel Syndicate. They're known for running illegal operations and playing different factions against each other. What if someone is using fake transponder codes to make it look like Zelvari ships are crossing the border? Chancellor Drace shook his head. That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof? Not yet, Jake admitted. But I know the shipping routes in this sector. I used to run cargo through here all the time. There's a nebula cluster right at the border that interferes with sensors. It would be the perfect place to hide illegal mining operations. If someone was mining there and got detected, they could mask their ship signatures to look like they belonged to either the Zelvari or the Korthans, depending on who was scanning them. Sareth leaned forward with interest. Go on. Jake felt all eyes on him, but he pushed forward. The Drexel Syndicate has been after the mineral deposits in that nebula for years, but neither the Zelvari nor the Korthans would give them permission to mine there. If they could start a conflict between you two, both sides would pull back from the border to prepare for war. That would leave the nebula unguarded. This is speculation from someone with no diplomatic training, Chancellor Drace said dismissively. We cannot base our response on the theories of a cargo pilot. Jake felt his face flush with embarrassment, but Sareth held up her hand. Actually, it makes sense. More sense than us risking war by violating treaties we have carefully maintained for decades. She turned to Vexen. Commander, can we send a stealth ship to investigate the nebula cluster? Vexen nodded. We can have a reconnaissance team there within 12 hours. Do it, Sareth ordered. Then she looked at Jake with respect in her eyes. And I want Jake to go with them. He knows these routes better than anyone else here. Your Majesty, surely that's too dangerous, another advisor protested. He's part of the royal family now. Which is exactly why he should go, Sareth said firmly. If his theory is correct, he may be able to identify things our military personnel would miss, and if we're going to prevent a war, we need every advantage we can get. Jake's heart was racing. He hadn't expected to be sent on an actual mission, but he nodded. I'll do whatever I can to help. 6 hours later, Jake found himself aboard a sleek Zelvari stealth ship with Commander Vexen and a team of elite soldiers. The ship was fast and nearly invisible to sensors, designed for reconnaissance and covert operations. As they approached the nebula cluster, Jake guided them along routes he remembered from his cargo days. There, Jake said, pointing to a section of the nebula. If I were trying to hide a mining operation, that's where I'd do it. The mineral density is highest there, and the sensor interference is strongest. Vexen ordered the ship closer. As they penetrated deeper into the nebula, their sensors began picking up energy signatures. And then they saw them, 3 large mining ships, painted to look generic but equipped with military-grade weapons. The ships were actively harvesting minerals, and their transponder codes were cycling between Zelvari and Korthan signatures. Record everything, Vexen commanded. We need complete documentation. They watched for nearly an hour, gathering evidence. The mining ships were clearly Drexel Syndicate vessels, and they had set up a sophisticated operation designed to frame both the Zelvari and the Korthans for border violations. On the journey back to the palace, Vexen looked at Jake with something that might have been respect. You were right. If we had responded to the Korthan accusations with force, we would have played directly into the Syndicate's hands. I just connected some dots, Jake said modestly. Anyone who knew the shipping routes could have figured it out. But you were the one who did figure it out, Vexen replied. Perhaps the Queen was wiser than I realized when she made you part of our family. When they returned to the palace, Sareth immediately called an emergency council meeting. Jake presented their findings, showing the recorded evidence of the Drexel Syndicate's deception. The council was stunned. We need to share this information with the Korthans immediately, Sareth said. And Jake, I want you to be part of the diplomatic delegation. Chancellor Drace stood up. Your Majesty, surely you cannot mean to send a human with no diplomatic training to represent our empire in such a critical negotiation. I can and I will. Sareth said with quiet authority. Jake saw what others missed. He prevented a war before it started. The Corthans need to see that we are acting in good faith, and Jake's honesty and directness will serve us better than any amount of diplomatic doublespeak. She looked at Jake with warmth. Besides, he is my son. It's time the galaxy understood that family is not defined by species, but by the bonds we choose to honor. The meeting with the Corthan representatives took place 2 days later on a neutral space station. Jake was nervous as he entered the conference room with Sareth and her diplomatic team. The Corthan delegates were tall beings with dark green skin and multiple arms, and they looked angry and suspicious. But as Jake helped present the evidence they had gathered, explaining in simple, straightforward terms exactly what they had discovered, he saw the Corthans' attitude begin to change. His lack of diplomatic polish actually worked in their favor. He wasn't trying to spin the information or make excuses. He was just telling them the truth. The lead Corthan delegate, Ambassador Threx, studied the recordings carefully. Then he looked at Jake with curiosity. You are the human who saved the Zelvari princess, are you not? The one the Queen adopted? Yes, sir, Jake said. And you discovered this deception how? Jake explained about his background as a cargo pilot and his knowledge of the shipping routes. Threx listened intently, and when Jake finished, the ambassador did something unexpected. He laughed, a deep rumbling sound. You prevent a war with cargo routes and common sense, Threx said. Perhaps there is hope for our species yet if we can learn to value such simple wisdom. He turned to Sareth. The Corthan Federation accepts your evidence and withdraws all accusations. Perhaps we should work together to deal with the Drexel Syndicate's interference. The tension in the room dissolved. What could have been the start of a devastating war had become the beginning of a new alliance, all because Jake had looked at the problem from a different angle. As they left the space station, Sareth put her hand on Jake's shoulder. You have proven yourself today, not just to the Corthans, but to everyone who doubted your place in our family. You used your unique knowledge and your honest heart to save countless lives. Your father would be very proud. Jake realized she meant her late mate, and the fact that she spoke of him that way made Jake feel truly accepted for the first time. He was no longer just the human who got lucky. He was a real member of this family, with something valuable to contribute. When they returned to the palace, Liara was waiting at the landing platform. She ran to Jake and hugged him tightly. Everyone is talking about how my brother stopped a war, she said proudly. I knew you were special. Jake hugged her back and smiled. Maybe he really did belong here after all. 6 months had passed since Jake prevented the war with the Corthans. Life in the palace had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jake had his own responsibilities now, serving as a cultural liaison between the Zelvari Empire and various human colonies. He helped negotiate trade agreements and worked to build understanding between species. It was meaningful work, and he was good at it. But one morning, as Jake was reviewing some shipping contracts in his office, a message arrived that made his heart skip. It was from Earth, from his family. His younger sister Emma was getting married in 3 weeks, and she desperately wanted him to be there. Jake stared at the message for a long time. He had kept in touch with his human family through video calls, telling them about his new life with the Zelvari. His parents had been shocked at first, then cautiously supportive. His sister had thought the whole thing was amazing, but he hadn't seen any of them in person since the day he rescued Liara. He felt pulled in 2 directions. He loved his life here with Sareth and Liara. They had become his family in every way that mattered. But Emma was his sister too, and he had promised her years ago that he would be at her wedding no matter what. That evening at dinner, Jake was quieter than usual. Liara noticed immediately and asked him what was wrong in her much-improved English. Jake showed them Emma's message. Sareth read it carefully, then looked at Jake with understanding in her eyes. You want to go, I do, Jake admitted. But I don't want to leave you and Liara either. I feel like I'm being torn in half. Liara looked sad. You will come back though, right? Of course I will, Jake said quickly, reaching for her hand. This is my home now, but Emma is still my sister too. Sareth was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Then she smiled in a way that reminded Jake of when she had first adopted him, full of warmth and certainty. Jake, family is not a competition where you must choose one side over the other. Love doesn't work that way. You can honor both your families. I know, but... No, Sareth interrupted gently. Listen to me. You have taught me something important these past months. You have shown me that family can transcend species and distance. Your love for us doesn't diminish your love for your Earth family, and your love for them doesn't diminish what you feel for us. She stood up and walked over to Jake. So Liara and I will come with you to Earth. We will attend your sister's wedding together, as a family should. Jake's mouth fell open. You want to come to Earth, but you're a queen. Don't you have responsibilities here? I have capable advisors who can manage things for a week, Sareth said with a slight smile. And more importantly, I want to meet the people who raised such a remarkable son. Your parents deserve to know that you are loved and cared for here. Liara jumped up excitedly. I get to see Earth? Really? Really, Sareth confirmed, laughing at her daughter's enthusiasm. Besides, it's time the Zelvari Empire strengthened its ties with Earth. What better way to do that than attending a human wedding? The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Sareth's advisors were shocked by her decision, but she was firm. Commander Vexen insisted on coming as head of security, along with a small team of guards. Diplomatic protocols had to be arranged. The human government was notified that the Zelvari Queen would be visiting Earth for the first time. Jake sent a message to his sister explaining the situation. Emma's response was a video call where she screamed with excitement for a full minute before she could form actual words. His parents were more reserved, but clearly pleased that they would finally meet Jake's new family. The royal ship landed at a spaceport near Denver, Colorado, where Emma lived. A small crowd of media and government officials had gathered, but Sareth had requested a low-key arrival. She stepped off the ship in elegant but simple robes, with Liara holding her hand and Jake at her side. Jake's parents were waiting at the edge of the landing area. His mother, Helen, had tears in her eyes. His father, Paul, looked proud and a little overwhelmed. Emma was bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. Jake introduced everyone. Sareth greeted his parents with the formal Zelvari gesture of respect, touching her hand to her heart and bowing slightly. But Helen Morrison would have none of that. She stepped forward and hugged the alien queen like they were old friends. Thank you for taking care of my son, Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. And thank you for coming all this way. Sareth seemed surprised by the hug at first, but then she returned it warmly. Your son saved my daughter's life and brought light back into our home. It is I who should thank you for raising such a good man. Paul shook Sareth's hand firmly, his eyes showing the respect of one parent to another. Then he knelt down to Liara's level. And you must be the princess I've heard so much about. Liara had been shy at first, but Paul's friendly smile put her at ease. Are you really Jake's father? She asked in careful English. I am, Paul said, which I guess makes us family too now. Emma couldn't contain herself any longer. She swept Jake into a huge hug, then insisted on hugging Liara too. I have an alien sister now. This is the coolest thing ever. The week leading up to the wedding was magical in ways Jake hadn't expected. His two families came together more naturally than he had dared to hope. Helen taught Sareth how to make her famous apple pie, and the two women spent hours talking in the kitchen. Liara and Emma became instant friends, with Emma teaching the young princess about Earth customs and human games. One evening, Jake found Sareth and his parents sitting together on the back porch of his childhood home, watching the sunset. They were deep in conversation, and Jake paused to listen. "He was always the kind of child who helped others," Helen was saying. "Even when he was little, he couldn't stand to see anyone hurt or struggling. It doesn't surprise me at all that he stopped to save Liara." "That compassion is a rare gift," Sareth said softly. "In my years of ruling, I have met many people who are strong or clever or brave, but true kindness, the kind that acts without thinking of reward, that is precious." Paul nodded. "We worried when he chose to become a cargo pilot instead of something more stable. But now I see it was exactly the right path. It put him where he needed to be." "I believe the universe has a way of guiding good souls to where they can do the most good," Sareth said. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I want you to know that Jake is not just my adopted son in title. I love him as truly as I love Liara. He has become part of my heart." Helen reached over and squeezed Sareth's hand. "I can see that, and I'm grateful. Every parent wants to know their child is loved, no matter how far from home they go." Jake felt tears prick his eyes and quietly walked away, not wanting to interrupt the moment. The wedding day arrived bright and clear. It was held in a garden venue with flowers and trees all around. Sareth and Liara wore beautiful gowns that combined Zelvari elegance with human wedding style. Jake wore a suit that felt strange after months of Zelvari robes, but Emma had insisted. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. Emma looked radiant as she married her partner Daniel, a kind man who worked as a teacher. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, Liara whispered loudly, "What does objected mean?" which made everyone laugh. At the reception, something unexpected happened. Emma asked Jake to give a toast as her brother. He stood up nervously, looking around at the gathered guests, both human and the few Zelvari who had come with Sareth's delegation. "When Emma asked me to be here today, I was afraid I might have to choose between my two families," Jake began. "But I've learned something important. Love doesn't divide, it multiplies. Emma, you've always been my sister and you always will be. And Liara, you're my sister too. Sareth, you're my mother in every way that matters, just as Helen and Paul will always be my parents." He looked at both families, his voice growing stronger. "Today isn't just about Emma and Daniel starting their life together. It's about all of us, humans and Zelvari, proving that family is built on love, not biology. It's built on showing up for each other, caring for each other, and choosing each other every single day." He raised his glass. "To Emma and Daniel, and to all the families we build across the stars." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Sareth wiped tears from her eyes, and Helen pulled Jake into a tight hug when he sat down. Later in the evening, Jake found himself standing with both his mothers, watching Liara and Emma dancing together on the dance floor. The young princess was laughing as Emma taught her some silly human dance move. "Look at them," Helen said with a smile. "They're already acting like real sisters." "They are real sisters," Sareth said. "Just as Jake is truly my son and yours. Family is what we make it." Jake stood between the two women who had given him life in different ways, surrounded by love from two worlds, and felt completely at peace. He had started out as a simple cargo pilot trying to do the right thing. Now he was a bridge between civilizations, a son to two mothers, and a brother to sisters on different planets. As the party continued around them, Emma grabbed a microphone and called for everyone's attention. "I just want to say thank you to Queen Sareth for traveling so far to be here and for sharing her son with us. And thank you to my amazing brother Jake, who proves every day that heroes don't need superpowers. They just need a good heart." Jake felt Liara slip her hand into his. On his other side, Emma came over and linked her arm through his. His two families, his two worlds, united in love and laughter. He had saved a princess and gained a queen's love. But more than that, he had learned that the human heart has infinite capacity for family, and that the bonds we choose can be just as strong as the ones we're born with. Looking around at the faces of everyone he loved, both human and Zelvari, Jake Morrison knew that he was exactly where he belonged. Not in one world or the other, but in both. Forever connected by the simple choice to care for a stranger who needed help. And that, he thought, was the greatest adventure of all. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.